I know we've been going through a lot over the last few weeks as we continue working, collaborating, and caring for ourselves, our families, and our students in new ways. Now, for quite a few years, and even as long as some of you have known me, I've been preaching about ways that you can continue learning while away from your students by leveraging the technology that you have available. However, the tips that I'm sharing here are not so much directly connected to what I commonly teach everyone. It's more on your well being, focusing on yourself, and setting yourself up for success while working in this new environment. Adding to your success, you'll learn in the second part of this video some great tips for engaging with students remotely with 8 strategies for remote learning. So, with this, here are some great tips, ideas, and thoughts for teaching online during these stressful times brought to us from the CEC. If you're interested in watching the full webinar, the link will be in the description below. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Now, the last thing I really want to focus on with the setup is your own self-care, right? Let's be good to ourselves. We're all going through this for the first time. Well, many of you are, and others at home are these kids are going through it for the first time. So dress professionally. Make sure you create a schedule so that you can stick to something that gives you dependability and routine. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. It is cold when you're sitting down a lot. Your blood might not flow as well as if you're up and moving in a physical building. So blanket or warm socks are definitely a plus. Get up every so often, move your body, get the blood flowing. There's a really good 20-20-20 rule. Look 20 feet away every 20 minutes for 20 seconds. Your eyes are probably not quite as used to looking at a computer that close to your face that much during the day. And of course, part of our good self-care is patience. Like I said, and like Dr. Grillo said, we've got a lot of kids who are doing this for the first time, parents who are both at home now. There are going to be an array of difficult situations. And just know everyone's in this situation. If your child pops in behind the camera, introduce them. I had that happen to me just the other day. Just pray that your kids are fully dressed, unlike my kids at that moment. But you know what? We're all trying our very best. We're all trying to get kids educated and help our students progress. The next thing that we want to take a look at in getting ready is our communication planning. And this is really critical for us as part of self-care, but also just as part of educators. I'm going to show you a sample routine for AM and PM schedules because it is very different. It might be obvious to many of us that we have to create a different routine if we're working from home, but still the nuances can be challenging and we need to set our own selves up for success. So let's take a look at Mr. Smith, who's a first grade special education teacher, and his sample daily routine. In the AM, Mr. Smith is I'm going to get up, I'm going to exercise, do my mindfulness activities, take a shower, I'm going to eat, drink my coffee, hydrate myself, and then newsflash, I've got a real world moment here. I've got to wrangle my own kids and get them going, and that's okay. Review of schedule, announcements, and objectives for the day. And then get that out to our families. You'll probably get into a cadence where you make phone calls to families, where you'll have video calls, where you'll exchange emails and even message through your favorite app like Edmodo or Class Dojo, or maybe many of you use Remind. And getting into this rhythm of checking in each day might be realistic if you have a smaller caseload, but if you have a larger caseload, be realistic with yourself. It might be every few days or at least weekly. And then make personal connections. It's very different when you're working online and you're not physically in the building. Those personal connections are going to be more intentional. So we recommend video office hours or making sure that you have video meetings with your colleagues and that you're collaborating regularly through phone, video, and other modes of making personal connections. Now at midday, I've got to check in. I'm doing my lunch bunch. I'm getting up, I'm walking around, I'm getting outside for a few minutes, I'm hydrating myself, and then another real moment pops in. I've got to keep my own kiddos entertained. I've got to focus on their learning as well. And then I'll check and connect with my families, my students. I post some success stories, some pictures, maybe even a recording of myself, and post it out to my families and connect with them. And of course, I want to remember to do my AM formative assessments and logins and metric data so I can get that documented while it's on my mind. One of the things that we often don't realize when we go online is that documentation, even though it's critical when we educate in person, it becomes more critical when we're working remote, so that we can go back and remind ourselves about these interactions and keep track of student progress. So in the PM, I'm going to look at and write out my parent notes on the message board. And then another real world moment. Now, if you're like me, I love my kids dearly, but we're going to be working at home and we might not be used to that. And our kids, as much as we love them, we might need to lock them in their room sometime. Now, I'm just joking. Please don't really do that. But you get my point. Focus on homework and study, skills planner checks, message your colleagues and collaborate on video or Zoom calls. Now, it might sound silly, but have a coffee talk over video on Zoom, or do a check-in, collaborate. You do still need to have that adult time. You still do need to make sure and reach out and collaborate with your colleagues and your administrators and your staff. So make sure at the end of all that, you're doing some of those formative assessments, you're logging your data, and you're keeping track of what you're doing. Now, let's move on to the third part of this first section and talk about how to get ourselves and our students online for the first time. Now that we've got our technology, our software, our workspace, and we have a communication plan and routine in place, we want to focus on getting ourselves and students online. So communication with our students while working with them from a distance is critical. Don't underestimate the need to over-communicate by phone or email. And so if we look at these 5 tips, I want to focus in on what it means for you to get your students online. So create a schedule for both you and your students, and so that you and your students and your families can see. That's an important component so that people know what to anticipate, and you'll rely on that. You'll send out reminders, and in those reminders, make sure to include a Zoom link. Make sure to include some instructions that I'll review here on this next slide. Prepare your materials ahead of time if you can, but again, do your very best. It might take some time as you learn this new modality. And when you're online, looking for materials can be distracting or can disengage the students that you're with, which is why eventually, as you become more adept to this modality, you'll want to have preparation ahead of time and be ready to rock and roll. Document thoroughly and make sure that you are logging all those notes and that data during or after the session, whatever your preference is, and then send some of the follow-up activities, reminders, and upcoming events. You might feel like you're sending a lot of those messages out to the families, right? But in reality, it's really about over-communicating. When you're moving online, it might feel like you're over-communicating, but I promise you, you'll need to do that. Otherwise, things will and may get lost in the shuffle. So on this next slide, I want to talk about what your students need to know. And this is a good resource for you because you can literally copy and paste this into a calendar invite. If you're using an existing tool or you're using a new tool, you can copy and paste some of these instructions into the calendar invite. Kelly, if you could go to the next slide, I want to show a few of the resources here that you've got. So they need to have, the family needs to have the same kind of quiet space, again, if as practical as possible, a working computer, a high-speed internet connection, a webcam, and a headset. And then in your invite or in your instructions, include your link to Zoom, and they click on it, and it will automatically open up that application. Be patient with your families. They may need to do it on their phone if they don't have a great internet connection. We have families of all different socioeconomic statuses, rural versus urban, access to technology and not. I have seen a lot of schools who are checking out Chromebooks and are offering other creative solutions like that. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is provide the best services that we can to these kids and help their education continue without regression. And so that last piece, you might need to understand how to allow their microphone or help them allow their microphone and audio and camera in Zoom for the first time. So these are a few really technical tips that you can copy and paste. You're welcome to reuse and repurpose yourself. Now, I want to move on to the second part of this webinar. And after the second part, I'll hand it off to our friend, Dr. Kelly Grillo. And there are some really good teaching strategies that you can apply to online instruction. I will go through 8 really solid teaching strategies that you can adapt for online delivery. So let's get set. The first one is to engage with your students. Engaging students online is different from engaging your students with your physical presence in a classroom. Now, if you're like my daughter many years ago and are engaged by some snow stuck on a glass window, it's pretty obvious to know that she's engaged. She's participating. You can see her body reactions and you can see her body language. So I encourage you to use your expressiveness. Be enthusiastic with your body language, with your tone of voice. Some of those intangibles don't come through quite as clearly as if you were physically in the same classroom. It's important to have your materials prepared beforehand, and it's important to have grace and patience for you and for your students. We're all experiencing these school closures for the first time as a result of novel coronavirus. So establishing your presence will signal to your students that you're visible, that you're available, and you'll be welcoming them to a new online learning environment. Remember, they might be nervous too. So that enthusiasm and tone of voice can ease their stress. Now, the second teaching strategy is setting clear expectations, and this is very much tied into your own setup, your routine, how you communicate through email, phone, video conferencing, messaging boards. And if you're like this teacher, you might be surprised if the expectations are not clear. This child obviously interpreted writing the largest number you can, not as the largest digit in infinity, but taking the number 1 and making it really tall. You know, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to see the humor in some of this, but then reset expectations, redirect, and help your students self-assess. The third strategy that we want to go over today is creating a supportive online learning environment and getting personal. So many of you use this Remind or Edmodo or ClassDojo application for communicating. If you don't, it is just fine. Our purpose here is not to tell you exactly how to run an online session or class. It's to give you strategies that you can implement with existing tools you're already familiar with. So this is one example. In this case, a teacher by the name of Amy uses Flipgrid to post a video and connect with her families. That creates a supportive environment. It creates visibility to you as a teacher or a therapist, and it develops that really good relationship that you need to have a responsive educational experience for these kiddos. The fourth strategy that we want to go over here is fostering personal relationships, and remember to have fun. As I was preparing for this webinar the past couple of days, I reached out to our team who serves many kids around the country, and I said, you know what do you do, or what is an experience you've had that fits this? And I was so inspired by Lacey. Lacey is an incredible speech and language pathologist, and this is her story. I'm going to read it to you here. The absolute most precious thing happened in my session this morning. I was finally able to get 2 of my students lined up together in a session. I have known that they would do well together because they are equally just so kind and have incredible attitudes. Both have autism, so the conversation needed some facilitation. During our chat, it comes out that these students live in the same town, 4 minutes from each other. I got to watch these 2 incredibly sweet teenagers exchange phone numbers and plan to meet up at the park eventually. This is so significant. As you conduct individual or group class and therapy sessions, you might have some really impactful experiences like this. And if you're like me, this is what makes it worth it. The fifth strategy is use a mix of tools readily available to you. Now, I've mentioned this a time or two, but this is a really important one for you because it does not require a lot of retooling. This is not the time to retool 100%. It's the time to do it incrementally. We encourage you as a best practice to make sure you look at what you've got and start from there. Don't stress out too much. Take a baseline and build from that. Kelly, if you can go to our next slide, I want to point out some of the resources that are free. And we are going to provide a full comprehensive list of free resources that you can take advantage of. So many companies have graciously offered their things for free. So TED-Ed has a lot of free materials, built out lesson plans. Scholastic has a lot of really great free materials. I personally am a fan of News to You. They've got a lot of really great free materials. And then you can also use things like Google Forms. Google has a wonderful set of tools. And this one in particular, Google Forms, allows you to gather insight before a session. So Kelly, if you can switch us to that next slide, I'll give you an example of a teacher who is using Google Forms to do check-ins. So in the morning or afternoon, Miss Venturino will go ahead and send this form to the students who will fill out the survey, and it gives Miss Venturino some great insight into that student. This can also be used as a way for student feedback, self-grading, self-assessing. The next strategy is breakout rooms. Zoom has a really great option to do breakout rooms. Your students can engage one-on-one to answer questions. They can engage in small groups to do research projects. And then you as an educator can close those breakout rooms and bring everyone back to the main video room. We'll have some more information in the follow-up handouts. In the next strategy, number 7, we want to focus on breaking learning into smaller chunks and patterns of activity. And being in an online setting, you have a little bit more flexibility just because we're able to reach students where they are. And there are so many different philosophies on pedagogy. This is not the end-all be-all. You might have things that you believe in more strongly, personally, but prepare, teach, apply, and reflect. And if you can chunk these out into smaller pieces, that can help you as an educator transition online, take smaller chunks and prepare in between those teaching opportunities. And then the last strategy is to make sure that we're soliciting strong feedback. So in feedback, of course, if we don't have the feedback from the teacher to student or from student to teacher, then we're not able to prepare, reflect, prepare, and instruct personalized learning to that student. So make sure that you take those opportunities with Google Forms or other means to solicit their self-grading, their self-assessing, in addition to you providing reinforcement of positive behaviors and redirection. Again, these are some strategies that hopefully will help you get up and running. It's not, much of it's probably not new to you, but it will help you to realize that you are in a very good spot. There are just some things that you need to do in order to transition online.